paintings done for the project by Julia Wang, and these integrated into the graphics are the two paintings. And eventually, Christy and Matthew are working on where those will eventually find a home. So now I'm going to pass it off to Maysee, who's going to talk more in depth about some of these issues.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to, from this point, I want to address some possible concerns and uncertainties from people who were either interviewees or possibly people from the beginning, people who wanted to come on board as possible collaborators. And so some of these concerns, and in fact the bullet points here, have more to do with well, I was going to say it has more to do with the people we wanted to interview. Some of them, I would say, also concern or could connect to people we wanted to try to get on board, but mostly with the interviewees. For example, the first bullet point there, what is the purpose of the documentary? Is it political? Is there a religious component here? Is there some other reason why you want to do this documentary? And so, for example, I remember making a phone call to one of the possible interviewees, and he ended up not answering the phone a few times. And then one time I ended up calling, and then he answered, but then it was almost like he had hung up. And then he finally called back again. And we started talking. He finally shared his name. I asked him if he'd be willing to come on board as a possible interviewee, and he began to question me. He said, what is the purpose of this? There must be some political reason for this. And by the way, this is a Hmong man. There must be a political reason for this. So I just shared with him the reason for this. This was one of the first phone calls I made. So this kind of, this was a surprise to me that he was questioning me in this way, in a fairly skeptical sort of way. And so I explained to him, and eventually he seemed to trust me a little bit more, and he said, okay, that sounds like a great idea, but I'm still not willing to interview. Go interview someone else. He was afraid that there might be something political. There were also others who asked questions such as, I would say there was another man I should also mention. There was another man who we tried to interview, or actually tried to interview over at the pre-New Year celebration here in Portage County. And he was an older Hmong gentleman, and he came up to me and he said, are you a religious group? What religious group are you? And I thought, again, where's this coming from? I'm not a religious group. And so, of course, again, I gave him my spiel, and I told him where I was from and the reason why we wanted to do this, and the fact that we wanted to tell the Hmong story in Portage County. And so he continued to question me, and eventually I think I satisfied his questions, and he finally said okay. And ultimately we did interview him a little bit. He doesn't show up in the final product of the documentary, but he was in some of the pre-interview. He was a part of the pre-interview stage. So he finally came on. He went on to explain to me why he was questioning me, which was really nice to know too, and that kind of confirmed my suspicions that he might be skeptical. What kind of light is it, and this is related, what kind of light is the documentary going to shed on the Hmong community of Portage County? Is it going to be a negative one? Is it going to be a positive one? Is it going to tell an authentic story? So that was questioned not only by those who had a higher level of education, but also those who have maybe perhaps been a victim of racism themselves or other issues that they've seen. So they were afraid of what kind of light the documentary would shed on the Hmong community. So of course, again, related, what messages will this convey? Will there be any kind of negative backlash? As you might remember, in the 90s, I think it was, there was some negative media footage about the Hmong community not too far from here, just in the Wausau area. And so there was a lot, I think it was on 2020, there was a lot of other media that shed a negative light on the Hmong people. So there was a lot of fear of that backlash. So some of that backlash too is are Hmong seen as savages? You know, that was, you know, people didn't want anything that showed up in the documentary to make the Hmong people look like they were uncivilized of some kind. So that was a very that was a concern of many of them. So then it led us to the question: was there an issue of trust here? Was there a level of trust? So as Tori and I talked about this time and time again, that term came up, that issue of trust. Is that something we had to explore a little deeper? Now, when I talk about trust, we can really talk about it on several levels. And Tori talked about that. She talked about the idea of us making sure that, although we didn't name it as trust, making sure that that trust was not violated between those who collaborated. So there's that. A level of trust between the interviewer and the interviewee. A level of trust between the people, both the Hmong. So within the documentary, there's talk about trust between Hmong and non-Hmong individuals within the Hmong community. So that idea, that concept, the trust, kept coming up over and over again. So, was trust an issue? You know, there seemed to be an uncertainty and conflict with what was considered the other. Right? So I'm talking about the other person. Are they going to understand me if I tell my story? So the other meaning something that we don't quite understand, or someone we don't quite understand, group of people we don't quite understand. Perhaps what we know is based on what we see in the media, or what we see or what we hear as stereotypes. So not being really sure what the other side brings. So raising chickens in the city, I have that up there, and I know Tori talked about it earlier. That was an example of perhaps an issue of trust. You know, by the city was, you know. Are they going to be able to, are these Hmong people going to be people we can trust to have these chickens and to abide by the laws? Differences in religious practices, I have that up there because there's a difference. Hmong traditionally have practiced shamanism, and many Hmong are now converting to Christianity. So there seems to be some of those differences there too. Earlier on, you know, when Hmong, well, actually many Hmong families now still practice shamanism. So now, so there's some of that conflict and quite a bit of difference. Differences in funeral practices. Hmong funerals tend to be a couple of days long at least. Now they're actually getting a little shorter and shorter all the time. Why? Because of work, right? Our jobs. So all we have for these Hmong funerals these days is perhaps a long weekend that includes maybe a Friday and to a Monday afternoon. It used to be much longer than that. So it wasn't until they started coming together, right? The people in this, so going back to the stories that the interviewees told, both the Hmong and the non-Hmong interviewees, all of them talked about, you know, when we talk about their level, their trust within what was happening in Portage County. There was what ended up, both groups, both Hmong and non-Hmong groups, were talking about the coming together and realizing that they had some commonalities, that is some things that they shared, such as the passion for gardening and farming. That was a large part of what brought them together. You see them a lot of times together at farmers markets now, right? So there's that. But also there was the sharing of the Hmong, I mean, they've always been farmers. They lived an agrarian lifestyle. Coming to this country, they needed that. That was part of what they knew. And then, of course, when they came here, there were sponsors. I'll just telling you a little bit of what's in the documentary. Both the Hmong and non-Hmong interviewees talked about how they came together as a result of this passion for gardening. People had land. People non-Hmong members had land. Hmong people wanted land so they can garden. So they came together and began to understand each other and realize they had some common interests. They realized that they shared foods that they liked, such as Hmong egg rolls. At first, the egg roll seemed quite foreign. They weren't sure if it was something they liked. But they started trying the Hmong egg rolls, and I believe much of it happened starting at the Portage County Cultural Festival, which is actually happening this coming weekend again. So as a way of trying to understand, some of you might remember this who have grown up or lived here for quite a while, that the Portage County, from my understanding, the Portage County Cultural Festival came about as a result of trying to bring about this understanding and trust. So Hmong egg rolls were made, people were skeptical about what they might taste like, who these Hmong people were, and as you know, now it's huge. Egg rolls are very popular. One of the most popular foods at the Portage County Cultural Festival. And now, as you know, it's much bigger now, a huge festival. Religion, as I mentioned before, even within the Hmong community, there is a lot, and the youth talk about this, the youth interviewees, they talked about being afraid of people who, maybe peers, who were non-Christian or were Christian, and their preconceived notions of one another. So they talked about that, but then realizing that, you know what, we actually have more similarities and differences, and not only that, but we can come together. And no matter what, if you're a shamanist or if you're a Christian, that there are good and bad people. So they talk about that. Oh, I should also mention, at first, there was lots of fear, and like I said earlier, there was lots of fear about who the other was. They started farming together, like I said, trying new foods, being able to talk about it, share ideas about gardening, and then coming together. I want to also share a story where just even recently, I live in Wausau, but I work here, of course, and I was talking to my own mother, and she was saying that she gardens, and that the garden that the plot of land is owned by a non-Hmong person, and they were learning from each other. And in fact, the non-Hmong person said, the person who owned the land, landowner said, let me show you how to take care of the vines of the beans, and so that they really grow and they and all of that. And so they started showing my mother, and then my mother thought, well, I can do better than that. Let me show you how I do it. So then they started exchanging ideas. And they thought, wow, I never knew that you could do it that way. Wow, I didn't know you could do it that way. Oh, sure, you showed me something, I showed you something. And as a result, they came together. In the documentary, there was talk about ongoing, there's some ongoing concerns about the younger generation trying to adapt, as they adapt to American culture, that they're beginning to lose knowledge of their Hmong language and culture. Okay. I don't want to say that they're becoming less Hmong, because that could be quite, we can go on and on. That's actually quite, there's quite a bit of controversy over that now, and there's more, I would say, starting to be more research on, does this make you less Hmong simply because you don't speak the Hmong language or don't know the Hmong culture? But one thing we can say for sure, though, is that they are starting to lose knowledge of the language and of the culture. So there's great concern of that. There's concern within the community as well. Within the Hmong community. And if you get a chance to watch the documentary, or perhaps you've seen it already, you'll see that there's even controversy, or there's, should I say, there's some conflict even within the Hmong youth. They come together and they say, well, that person's Hmong, they should be able to speak Hmong. If I speak Hmong to my peer here, he or she should be able to speak Hmong to me. And they're finding that that's not always the case. And then, of course, the other one is saying, who mostly speaks English might say, well, that doesn't necessarily make me any less Hmong. Yeah, I can understand you, but I just can't speak it. So then they talk about that. But one thing I noticed, and we haven't actually even talked about this, is it looked to me in the documentary that what brought them together was this need. I think they were coming together to put together a play of sorts, or they were working on a play about the Hmong people. So those efforts brought them together and allowed them to trust each other, because they also talked about how oftentimes they were separated, simply because some spoke Hmong and some did not. Okay. So there's misunderstandings and misconceptions about between cultures. So, do you understand me? So do you understand me when I tell you about my funerals, the way we hold our funerals? Does that make, if I tell you this, are you going to think it's uncivilized? Or are you going to really understand that we just practice in different ways, but we're both mourning? So there were concerns about that, and some of that, I would say, came out after the showing. After probably I've heard some things after the showing. After each showing, especially with some of the people who were in the video, they perhaps would ask questions like, gosh, what, again, those questions revisited again. Does this documentary shed a positive light on the Hmong community within Portage County? So they're afraid that there might be misconceptions, misunderstandings of the culture. So again, building trust was just an overarching theme all throughout. We realized it kept coming up, starting from the beginning. When we were trying to find groups to collaborate with. One of the first group we realized we needed to collaborate with was the Hmong American Association of Portage County. That we needed to partner with them, to go to them to be one of our first collaborators, because they were the closest to the community, and that was important. And then after that, we wanted to, well, not just after that, actually around the same time, we wanted to make sure that students were on board also. We wanted to have a range of age groups and different types of people, different types of experiences. So finally, we would come together, discuss our plans, strategize, come up with ideas for who to interview, how to go about the process. And then as a result of all of that, then it's the coming together. And whether it was from the beginning, whether it was between the Hmong and non-Hmong community members, coming together to talk and share ideas was essential to being able to overcome any sorts of fears that existed. So now I've said fear here, and I mentioned trust earlier. So I'm going to leave that kind of open, because I want us to entertain, to talk about that a little bit more with those of us who are here. So I want to leave that for more discussion. Is trust the right word? Is there a component of fear? How do we continue to overcome any fears, if there are any? So actually at this point, we would also, you saw it earlier in the documentary, but before we open it up for discussion, and also for the discussion, we're actually going to invite some additional, some of the people who are here with us, who played a huge role in the documentary. But I definitely want to acknowledge the Wisconsin Humanities Council, who provided us a major grant for this project. University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, provided us 2 grants for this project. The Hmong and Southeast Asian American Club, as we mentioned earlier, provided us, I believe, some funding, as well as many students who helped us on the project, and then of course the Community Foundation of Central Wisconsin. So we want to make sure that we acknowledge them, and this project, it's hard to say, we all know that a project like this needs funding, and so we're very grateful that they were able to help us. So Tori?
I'm going to show just a few more minutes, and then everyone, people that are here that are involved in the project.
Yes.
A couple more minutes.
khá là mình khá là muốn kỳ sao xử lý kỳ là chuyện của tôi sẽ
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ